On a quiet street in Dublin, where the rain paints thin silver lines on the windows and the city glows in distant orange, a 7-year-old girl lies awake while the world around her sleeps. Her name is Aisling Byrne. To anyone passing by her small apartment, she is just another child in a crowded city. But on one particular night, something happens that will never fit in the language of just another. The clock on the kitchen wall marks 3:17 a.m. Her mother, Maeve, exhausted from another hospital shift, finally drifts into a fragile sleep on the worn-out sofa. The television is off, the kettle is cold, and the only sound is the distant whisper of cars on wet asphalt. It is the kind of silence that should bring rest. Instead, it opens a door. In the dim light of the hallway, Aisling sits up in bed without being called. Her eyes are not confused. She doesn't rub them, doesn't wander. She simply turns her face toward a corner of the room where there is nothing, no lamp, no shadow, no one. And yet, her small hands tremble as if something has just arrived. Later, Maeve will say that there was a feeling in the air, a pressure, like the moment before a storm. No voices, no visions, just a sense that the room was no longer empty. Aisling lowers her feet to the cold floor and whispers a sentence that no 7-year-old should know how to say. "Mom, heaven doesn't sleep. It waits." From that night on, nothing is simple anymore. Aisling begins to speak of a place filled with light that doesn't hurt the eyes, and another place where there is no sky at all. She draws 2 doors, one bright, one burning, and says she walked through both. She starts to talk about names being called, about choices that don't look like choices, about a warning she was told to bring back. In the city used to rain, Maeve will face a storm that no umbrella can stop. Is her daughter sick? Is her mind breaking? Or did a 7-year-old girl truly step into heaven and hell and return with a message for those who still think they have time? If you had been there that night, watching the quiet light behind her eyes, what would you have felt? Would your heart recognize the warning or turn away? The rain had not stopped since dusk, soft and persistent, as if the sky itself were whispering secrets over Dublin's rooftops. In the Byrne apartment, a fragile warmth lingered in the air, the kind that comes not from heaters or blankets, but from a home fighting to stay gentle despite exhaustion. Maeve Byrne lay curled on the sofa, her hospital scrubs still faintly smelling of antiseptic, her breathing uneven from a week of double shifts. She didn't hear the pipes creak, nor the faint hum rising through the floorboards. But Aisling did. The child lay awake, her eyes reflecting the faint orange glow of the street lamp outside. The room around her was still, but not silent. Not anymore. There was a density in the air, a quiet weight that pressed softly against her chest, as if the darkness itself were paying attention to her. She turned her head slowly, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Something had returned. Aisling sat up, her small fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. She felt the cold air slide along her bare feet like a breath that did not belong to the room. Her heartbeat did not quicken. Instead, it softened, like someone being gently called by name. She glanced toward the doorway, a thin frame where shadows gathered but didn't fall. It was as though the hallway itself was waiting for her to move. She didn't call for her mother. She didn't cry. Her voice emerged as a whisper shaped more by wonder than fear. "I remember you." The moment she spoke, the light on the bedside table flickered. Once, then steadied, glowing slightly warmer than before. Aisling blinked, not startled, almost relieved. She slid off the bed, each step quiet, deliberate, guided by something she could not describe but felt deeply. The wooden floor was cold, yet beneath the chill there was another sensation, a pulse, faint and distant, like a heartbeat coming from beneath the earth. She reached the doorway. And that was when the silence changed. There are silences that comfort, like a blanket after a long day. There are silences that unsettle, like a phone ringing that never comes. But this silence, it felt aware. Aisling stepped into it, and something invisible stepped around her. The hallway stretched in its usual shape, but the shadows were wrong. They didn't fall away from the light. They leaned toward it, drawn as if by magnetism. Aisling lifted her hand, tracing the air, and for a moment, only a heartbeat, the faintest shimmer passed between her fingers, like dust made of gold. Down the hall, on the sofa, Maeve stirred. The mother opened her eyes slightly, sensing more than hearing movement. Not danger, something else. A pressure behind her ribs, a tug in her instincts, the kind she hadn't felt since the moment Aisling was born. Something is happening to my child. "Aisling," she murmured, barely awake. The girl turned, her expression soft, almost apologetic, but she didn't answer. She simply looked at her mother with eyes that seemed to hold reflections no room should contain. Then, in a voice fragile but certain, she said the sentence that tightened Maeve's lungs and made the room feel too small. "Heaven doesn't sleep. It waits." Maeve sat up sharply, the blanket sliding off her shoulders. "What did you say, sweetheart? Come here. Come back here." But Aisling wasn't frightened. She stepped backward, closer to the center of the hallway, as though listening to something behind the silence. A voice without sound, a call without words. The light at the end of the corridor dimmed, then pulsed softly, like a slow heartbeat. Aisling's face relaxed, serene, almost illuminated by something unseen. "They showed me the door again," she whispered. "The bright one, and the burning one." Maeve froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What door?" "Aisling, look at me." "What are you talking about?" Aisling lifted her hand, pointing gently at the empty air in front of her, a place where Maeve saw nothing, but where the child saw everything. "They told me you have to listen this time." Maeve stood, trembling, the room colder now, the shadows shifting like curtains stirred by a wind that wasn't there. She reached for her daughter, but stopped halfway, struck by a sensation she could not name. A feeling like walking into a chapel just as someone finishes praying, a feeling of arrival. "Aisling, who told you that?" The girl blinked slowly, her breath warm in the frigid hallway. Those next words did not belong to any 7-year-old. "The ones who wait for us, on both sides." Buses sighed at their stops. Shop shutters rolled upward with metallic groans, and the grey sky stretched low over the city like a familiar heavy blanket. People hurried under umbrellas, coffee steamed from paper cups, and the world continued in its quiet routine. Unaware that in a small apartment above a narrow street, a 7-year-old girl had spoken of doors that no one could see. Maeve stood in the kitchen, fingers wrapped too tightly around a chipped mug of tea. The warmth didn't reach her bones. She stared at Aisling, who sat at the small table, eating cereal with the calmness of a child who had done nothing unusual the night before. "Do you remember what you said?" Maeve asked, trying to sound casual and failing. Aisling lifted her eyes. They were clear, bright, not feverish, not lost. But there was something in them, a depth that made Maeve feel like she was standing at the edge of a lake, unable to see the bottom. "About heaven?" the girl replied, as if talking about a movie she had watched. Maeve swallowed. "And the other place." Aisling's spoon paused in the air. The room seemed to exhale, as if the question itself had weight. A faint breeze moved the curtain, though the window was closed. Aisling lowered the spoon, milk dripping back into the bowl in soft, slow drops. "I didn't go there last night," she said quietly. "Not really. They were just, reminding me." Maeve's heartbeat tightened. "Reminding you of what, Aisling?" The child's gaze drifted to the window, to the pale slice of sky beyond the glass. "The first time," she said, "when I left, but my body stayed." Maeve's hand trembled so much she had to set the mug down. Memories surged up, unwelcome and sharp. A different night, months earlier, the one she had worked so hard to file away as a nightmare. It had been late then, too. Another double shift, another collapse onto the sofa with her shoes still on. She remembered waking suddenly, heart racing, with no idea why. There had been no sound, no movement, only a feeling. Something's wrong. She had gone to Aisling's room and found her lying perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing shallow. But it wasn't the stillness that froze Maeve's blood. It was the expression on her daughter's face. Not pain, not fear, wonder. Her lips had been parted slightly, as if she were listening to a better story told somewhere far away. "Aisling, what happened that night?" Maeve asked now, voice barely more than air. The girl slid off the chair and padded barefoot to the living room, as if the answer needed more space than the kitchen allowed. Maeve followed, the floorboards creaking under her weight. Aisling stopped in the center of the room where the faded rug met the bare wood. "Here," she said simply. "It started here." Maeve glanced around. The same sofa, the same cheap coffee table, the same small television. Nothing sacred, nothing strange, just life. "You were sleeping," Aisling continued. "I heard your breathing, and then I heard something else." "What?" Maeve whispered. "Your name," the girl said, but not with a voice. It was like someone said it inside a light. She reached out her hand, palm facing upward, as if feeling for a warmth that wasn't there anymore. "I got scared for you," Aisling admitted. "Not for me. For you. So I wanted to see where the name was going." Maeve felt the ground tilt. "See where it was going?" Aisling nodded. And then everything got quiet. Not like when someone turns off the TV. Quieter, like the world went into another room and closed the door. She closed her eyes, brow furrowing as she remembered. The overhead light was off, but as she spoke, a faint reflection shimmered in the dark screen of the television, the suggestion of brightness that had no source. "I was still here," she said, "but I wasn't." She pressed a hand to her chest, searching for a word too large for 7 years of life. "It felt like when you take off your shoes after walking all day," she finally said. "Like I stepped out of something, and I wasn't heavy anymore." Maeve's throat tightened. The kettle in the kitchen clicked softly as it cooled, a small mechanical sound that felt jarringly ordinary against the weight of her daughter's words. "What did you see?" Maeve asked. Aisling's eyes opened. For a moment, there was a shine in them that did not come from any lamp or window. A quiet, internal glow. "Light," she said, "but not from the sun. It doesn't make shadows. It goes through things, through you." She glanced at her own hands, turning them slowly. "It went through me, and it knew everything, all at once." Maeve swallowed hard. "You weren't scared?" Aisling thought about it. "At the beginning, no. It felt like when you hold me after a bad dream. Like that, but bigger. And then—" Her voice softened. The air seemed to cool. "And then they showed me the other side." Maeve didn't realize she had taken a step back until her heel hit the edge of the coffee table. "The other side of what, Aisling?" "The light," the girl said. "Where it stops going through. Where it stops trying." She looked up at her mother, and for the first time that morning there was something almost like pain in her eyes. "Mom, that place doesn't have sound. Not really. It has noise, but no sound. Do you understand?" Maeve shook her head, unable to find words. "In heaven," Aisling continued quietly, "things sing without music. There are no clocks, but you feel time, finishing. In the other place, the clocks scream, but nothing moves. A small shiver passed along Maeve's spine. "You saw hell," she whispered, almost ashamed of saying the word out loud in front of her own child. Aisling didn't flinch. "They didn't call it that, but I knew. You just know. It's like when you smell something burning even before you see the smoke." She paused, and a shadow crossed her small face. "The ground there doesn't feel like ground. It feels like decisions. All the ones people never thought mattered." A silence fell between them again, thicker than before. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere distant, then faded into the city's constant hum. Inside the apartment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock, steady, indifferent, marking each second as if nothing in the world had changed. But something had. Maeve sank slowly onto the sofa, legs weak. "Why are you telling me this now, after all these months?" Aisling walked to her, climbing up beside her with the casual familiarity of a child sitting with her mother on any other day. She leaned her head against Maeve's shoulder, small fingers bunching in the fabric of her scrubs. "Because last night," she said, "they told me they're going to say your name again." Maeve's heart stopped for a fraction of a second. "Whose name will they say after that, Mom?" Aisling whispered, eyes staring at something only she could see. "Heaven is waiting, but so is the other place. And they both. Listen." She turned her face up to her mother. "They told me to warn you before it's not just a dream anymore." The rest of the day unfolded with an unsettling quietness, the kind that sneaks into the corners of a home and waits there, patient, like dust that refuses to settle. Maeve moved through the apartment as though it had become unfamiliar, as though the walls themselves had heard her daughter's warning and were holding their breath. Aisling returned to her room after their conversation, humming softly, drawing slowly, quietly, deliberately. At first glance, she looked like any child lost in imagination. But Maeve knew better now. The girl wasn't drawing stories. She was remembering. When Maeve finally gathered the courage to enter, Aisling did not turn around. She simply continued sketching with a soft pencil, her small hand steady. The page before her was covered in lines, 2 doors, one outlined in gold, the other in charcoal. But today there was something new, a faint, ghost-like shape standing between them. Not a person, not a shadow, something waiting. Maeve knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, what is that?" Aisling glanced at her mother, her expression calm but heavy with something far older than 7 years. "It's the place where the names go before someone hears them." Maeve's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" Aisling tapped the empty shape lightly with her pencil. "This is where your name was, before it was said, and before it will be said again." A tremor ran through Maeve's hands as she reached for the page, but Aisling covered her mother's hand gently, not to stop her, but to steady her. "It didn't stay there long last night," the girl added. "Names don't stay still when the doors open." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across Dublin, though the weather report had promised a clear day. The light through the window dimmed as a cloud passed, pressing a soft gloom into the room. Maeve sat on the edge of the bed, feeling her heartbeat in her fingertips. "Aisling, who told you all of this? You keep saying they. Who are they?" The girl's eyes softened with something like sadness. "You won't believe me. Try me." Aisling took a slow breath. "The ones made of light and the ones made of not light." Maeve blinked. "Not light." "Their shapes are like people," the girl said quietly, "but not finished. Like someone tried to remember them but forgot the details." A coldness slipped down Maeve's spine. Aisling continued, her voice steady. "The light ones don't call names unless something important is near. The dark ones call names too, but only after someone has ignored the light for too long." Maeve felt dizzy. Are you saying something is coming for me? Aisling shook her head gently. Not coming. Waiting. The thunder outside grew louder, closer, though the sky was still pale and almost blue. Maeve rose quickly and went to the window. The street below was calm, children in uniforms walking home, a man unlocking his bicycle, a neighbour carrying groceries. Normality moved, as if the world itself didn't feel the shift inside the Byrne apartment. But Maeve felt it. She felt watched. A soft rustling sound made her turn. Aisling was sliding another sheet of paper from beneath her pillow. She held it out to her mother. "Mom, this is the sound your name made." Maeve hesitated, then took the drawing. It wasn't a name in letters. It was a swirl of lines, echoing curves like ripples in water, all converging into a single point that seemed to pull the eye inward. As Maeve stared at it, her chest tightened. It felt like falling forward, like leaning toward a whisper. She lowered the paper quickly, breath shaking. "Why did you draw this?" "Because when light says your name," Aisling whispered, "it feels warm. But last night, it didn't feel warm." Maeve sat heavily on the floor, the rug rough beneath her palms. A memory surfaced, one she had buried beneath exhaustion and denial. A month earlier, she had woken in the hospital break room after a night shift and felt, for a fleeting second, as though someone had been standing just beside her. Not seen. Not heard, just felt. A pressure. A presence. She had brushed it off then. Now she wasn't so sure. Aisling crawled into her mother's lap, small arms wrapping around her waist. The girl pressed her head to Maeve's chest, listening to her heartbeat. "You're thinking too loud," the child murmured. Maeve let out a shaky laugh. "I'm scared." "I know." A moment passed, a long, heavy silence that felt almost sacred. Then Aisling lifted her head. "Mom, they weren't angry when they said your name. But they sounded urgent." "Urgent for what?" Aisling hesitated, eyes drifting to the doorway as though expecting something to pass through it. "They said you have to choose which door you're walking toward. Everyone chooses, even when they think they aren't choosing." Maeve swallowed. "And if I choose wrong?" Aisling's small hand tightened around hers. "They said that's why they let me come back, to tell you before you run out of chances." A faint knock echoed from somewhere in the apartment, not loud, not sharp, but soft and unmistakable, like a fingertip tapping wood from the wrong side of the door. Maeve's breath froze. Aisling didn't flinch. "They're listening now," the girl said quietly, "and they want to see what you'll do next." Days passed, but time did not feel like time anymore inside the Byrne apartment. It felt like a series of pauses between things Aisling said and things Maeve was afraid to ask. The city outside remained stubbornly normal. Buses still wheezed up the hill. Teenagers still laughed too loudly at the corner shop. The bakery downstairs still flooded the stairwell with the smell of fresh bread every morning at 7 sharp. Life went on, as if it hadn't heard the warning, but Maeve had, and Aisling had seen it. On a Tuesday afternoon, a folded envelope appeared in the postbox with Maeve's name written in blue ink, a hospital logo in the corner. She opened it, standing on the stairs, the air smelling faintly of rain and detergent. Her eyes scanned the printed words. Mandatory evaluation, fatigue, incident reports, possible leave of absence. Her chest tightened. She knew what this meant. Too many night shifts. Too many mistakes narrowly avoided. Too many colleagues noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. It felt like the world, or at least her small portion of it, was quietly preparing to remove her from her post. As she stood there, the fluorescent light above the stairwell flickered, just once, but enough to make her look up. For a brief second, She had the ridiculous, irrational sensation that the light wasn't failing. It was reacting to the paper in her hand, reacting to her fear, reacting to her name. By the time she reached the apartment, Aisling was already waiting by the door. She hadn't heard footsteps, she hadn't heard keys. Yet she was there, small, barefoot, still in her pajamas, even though it was mid-afternoon. "You opened it on the stairs," the girl said softly. Maeve tried to smile. "How did you know that?" Aisling's gaze lowered to the envelope. "Because that's where it got heavier." Maeve stared at her. "The letter?" "The choice," Aisling corrected. "They're asking if you're going to keep pretending you're fine or listen before it breaks." Maeve stepped past her and dropped the envelope on the kitchen table as if it burned. "It's just work, Aisling. Adults get checked sometimes. It's normal." The child said nothing. She moved toward the window instead, pressing her palm lightly to the glass. Clouds rolled low and slow over Dublin, heavy and swollen with rain that hadn't fallen yet. "You don't like hospitals," Aisling said, still facing outside. "I work in one," Maeve replied, a little too sharply. "That's not what I said." Maeve opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The truth sat bitter on her tongue. It wasn't the patients, it wasn't the blood or the beeping machines. It was the corridors at night, when the world outside was sleeping and only fluorescent lights and whispers remained. She hated the feeling that something unseen walked those halls. "You're going in today, aren't you?" Aisling asked quietly. "How do you—" Maeve sighed. "Yes, short shift. They want to talk." She made quotation marks in the air with her fingers. It felt childish. Everything felt childish compared to the words her daughter had been saying. Aisling turned from the window, that soft, not childish gaze resting on her mother. "I have to go with you." Maeve laughed nervously. "You can't. They don't allow kids on the floor unless—" "It's not them," Aisling interrupted gently. "It's them." The way she said it made the air tighten. "You told me," the girl continued. "You felt something standing near you in the break room once. They're going to stand closer today, both of them." She hesitated, then added, "The ones who wait on each side." A cold ripple moved down Maeve's spine. "Aisling, I can't take you. I don't even know if I'm keeping this job. I don't know." "You're not going there to keep your job," Aisling replied. "You're going there to hear your name again." The words hung in the air like a bell still vibrating after being struck. Against everything that made sense, against every normal rule, Maeve did something she had never done before. She called a friend from the hospital, asked a favor, and brought Aisling along, only for a little while, she promised. Just until after the meeting. The hospital rose against the grey sky, all glass and concrete, its windows reflecting clouds like slow, unfinished thoughts. Automatic doors slid open with a sigh as they entered, releasing the familiar blend of antiseptic and tiredness. People moved around them in scrubs and white coats, voices low, footsteps quick. Life and death had their own rhythm here, and Maeve knew it by heart. But something was different today. The lights seemed too bright. The white too white. The beeping from distant rooms too slow, as if someone were stretching time. Aisling held her mother's hand, but didn't cling the way children usually did. Her grip was steady, almost anchoring. Her eyes wandered over the corridors, not with curiosity, but with recognition, as though she'd been here before in a different way, without walls, without ceilings, without floors. They reached the small office where Maeve was meant to meet with the supervisor and a representative from HR. Through the narrow window in the door, she could already see two figures sitting, papers in hand, serious faces. She felt suddenly small, like a child called to the principal's office. "You wait here," she told Aisling, kneeling in front of her. "I won't be long. Just sit on that bench, all right?" Don't talk to anyone you don't know." Aisling didn't nod, didn't argue. She simply looked at her mother for a long moment, her gaze deep, searching. "Mom," she whispered, "if they say you're tired, believe them." Maeve forced a smile and kissed her forehead. "I'll be fine." She stood, turned, and reached for the door handle. The lights flickered. All of them. Not just in the hallway, not just in the office ahead. A ripple ran along the ceiling, a synchronized stutter of electricity that made nurses stop mid-step and glance upward. For a brief second, the corridor plunged into a thin, grey half-light, as if someone had placed a veil over the world. In that moment, Maeve heard it. Her name, not with ears, not from behind her or ahead of her, inside. It resonated through her chest like a note from an unseen instrument, clear and undeniable, not angry, not gentle, urgent. Maeve's hand fell away from the door handle. In the dim corridor, Aisling did not look up at the lights. She looked straight ahead, toward a space just beyond her mother's shoulder. Anyone else would have seen nothing there. Just beige walls, institutional art, a fire extinguisher in its glass case. But to Aisling, one side of the corridor brightened, not with hospital light, but with something softer, deeper, a whiteness that somehow contained every color at once. It didn't blind, it invited. On the opposite side, the shadows thickened almost imperceptibly, not darker, but heavier, as if the air there had learned how to weigh. Two presences, no faces, no forms, just directions. A nurse brushed past them and shivered, rubbing her arms as if cold. "Weird," the woman muttered to herself. "Feels like a draft here." Then she hurried on, unaware that she had just walked between something watching and something waiting. Maeve's eyes were wide, unfocused as she held her chest. Her breathing turned shallow. Did you feel—" "They said your name louder this time," Aisling replied softly. Maeve swallowed hard. Which side was it from?" Aisling's eyes filled with a light that did not come from the flickering bulbs above. "Both," she said. The corridor lights steadied, returning to their usual sterile brightness. Voices rose again. Machines beeped. The world pretended nothing had happened. The office door opened with a click. Maeve's supervisor looked out, offering a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maeve, we're ready for you." For a fraction of a second, the inside of the office looked stretched, longer than it should be, the corners too far, the ceiling too high. Then it snapped back to normal. Maeve glanced at Aisling. The girl didn't smile, didn't cry. She only spoke one sentence, her voice barely louder than a breath, yet somehow cutting through every other sound. "Remember what I told you, Mom," she whispered. "Heaven waits. Hell watches." Maeve stepped into the office, and as the door closed behind her, something in the corridor shifted, not seen, not heard, like a chair being pulled out in a room no one had entered yet, waiting for someone to sit down. The office door shut with a softness that felt intentional, as if the building itself understood that sound would have been too much for the moment. Maeve stood just inside, fingers trembling at her sides, eyes adjusting to the stagnant yellow light. The walls were lined with certificates, charts, and a single-frame photograph of the hospital staff smiling under a clear sky, a sky that felt impossibly distant now. Two people sat across the table, Dr. Clancy, her supervisor, and a woman from HR whose name Maeve could never remember. Papers were arranged neatly, pens aligned, a glass of water waiting in front of her chair like a peace offering before a verdict. "Maeve," Dr. Clancy began softly, "thank you for coming in." Her voice was too gentle, too controlled. Maeve felt the hairs on her arms rise. "Please," the HR woman added, "sit." Maeve sat, but her back never touched the chair. Her body was alert, listening for something. Not from them, not from the room, but from the echo still vibrating inside her chest. Her name, spoken without sound, from both sides. She tried to steady her breathing. Dr. Clancy folded her hands. "We're concerned. You've been under intense pressure. Your overnight shifts have increased, your hours are irregular, and several colleagues have noted you seem distracted." Distracted. Such a human word for something she did not understand. "I'm fine," Maeve muttered automatically. The HR woman leaned in slightly. "Are you? Honestly?" Maeve opened her mouth to answer, but the lights in the room dimmed, then brightened, so subtly the HR woman didn't even blink. But Maeve felt it. Pressure behind her ears. A faint warmth across her neck. She glanced to the corner of the office. There was nothing there, and yet something was standing there, waiting, observing, without presence, but real. A coldness spread across her shoulders. She forced her gaze back to the table. "I'm tired," she admitted, "but that's normal. Every nurse here is tired." Dr. Clancy exchanged a look with the HR woman. "It's more than tiredness. You nearly misfiled medication last week, and during your last night shift, you froze in the hallway." Maeve's breath caught. You weren't responding to your name," Dr. Clancy continued gently. "We called you several times." The room tilted. Her name again. Called by humans that time, but not reaching her. "Maeve," the HR woman said, her voice softening, "we think you need rest, real rest, time away from this place." Behind them, a monitor crackled faintly, though it was turned off. A line of static flickered across the dark glass, like a pulse from another world. Maeve stared at it, heart pounding. "Time away, time away, time away." A whisper inside her repeated the phrase, but it wasn't her own voice. It was one of the names calling, not for her job, for her soul. Her fingers curled into fists. "I don't want to lose my position." "You haven't lost anything," Dr. Clancy replied. "We're offering temporary leave. You'll still be on staff. Just step back for a while." Maeve tried to speak, but the air thickened, just slightly, as if invisible hands were pressing gently against her ribs. She coughed, covering her mouth. "Maeve?" the HR woman asked, concern rising. But Maeve wasn't looking at them anymore. She was looking past them, to the far corner of the office, where the light bent again, gently, almost politely, as if making room for something entering. For a presence without legs or form or breath. The air shimmered faintly like heat over pavement, though the room was cold. Maeve swallowed hard. She felt a second presence forming behind her, much heavier, lower, colder. Her heart beat twice, too fast, then slowed abruptly. The HR woman noticed. "Maeve, you're paler than before. Do you need water?" Maeve raised a trembling hand. "Do you feel cold, suddenly?" Both women shook their heads. Of course they didn't. It wasn't for them. Her pulse thudded painfully. The room seemed farther away, like she was looking at it from behind glass or from underwater. Between the two invisible presences, her name pulsed again in her mind. Not spoken, not formed, just felt. A warning or a summons. She didn't know which. "Maeve," the HR woman repeated, now clearly alarmed. The fluorescent lights hummed louder, their vibration filling the room like distant wings unfurling. The blinds against the window swayed, though there was no breeze. Papers shifted on the table, one lifting slightly, as if stirred by a breath that never touched the air. Maeve pressed her hand against the table to steady herself. "They're here," she whispered. Dr. Clancy frowned. "Who's here?" Maeve shook her head, tears rising. "I don't know what they are. I don't know. I just know." A knock sounded on the door. Soft, measured, as if someone knew the exact second the conversation would break. Dr. Clancy rose automatically, walking to the door. She opened it just a crack. Aisling stood in the hallway, small, silent, her hair slightly lifted by a breeze that wasn't there. "Sweetheart," Maeve rasped. "I told you to stay outside." Aisling shook her head. "They're saying your name again, Mom," she whispered. "Inside this room." Dr. Clancy stared at the girl, confused. "Aisling, how did you get—" But Aisling wasn't looking at the adults. She was looking into the corner of the office. Her voice softened to a whisper. "Not yet," she said, as if speaking to someone only she could see. "She needs more time." Maeve's blood ran cold. Dr. Clancy touched Maeve's shoulder gently. "You're shaking. Sit." But Maeve grabbed her hand instead. "Do you feel it now?" she whispered. "What?" The weight in the room." Dr. Clancy hesitated, then frowned. "The air is strange, but maybe the ventilation—" The overhead lights flickered again. Once, twice. The brightest bulb above Maeve dimmed, then pulsed softly like a slow heartbeat. Aisling stepped into the room without being invited. She walked to her mother and took her hand. "Mum," she said gently, "they're trying to tell you that if you don't stop, you won't hear the light next time." Maeve felt the world narrow. "And what happens if I don't hear the light?" she whispered. Aisling looked toward the darker corner of the room. "That's when the other one answers first." The temperature dropped a full degree in a single breath. Even Dr. Clancy wrapped her arms around herself. "What on earth?" The HR woman stood abruptly. "Maeve, I think you're having a panic episode. You need to—" "No," Aisling said, her voice calm, steady, too steady for a child. "She's being called." Maeve clutched her chest. Not pain, recognition. A warm pulse, like someone touching the inside of her ribs with light, pressed against her. A second pulse followed, colder, slower, like a warning running along her spine. 2 calls, 2 sides, 1 name. A tear slipped down Aisling's cheek, not from fear, but from knowing what her mother could not outrun. "You have to choose, Mom," she whispered. The lights flickered a final time, and then everything went still, as if heaven and hell were holding their breath at the same moment. For a long moment, the room felt suspended, not in silence, but in anticipation. As if something vast and invisible had paused, waiting for Maeve Byrne to understand the weight of the breath she had just taken. Aisling held her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers colder than before. The air around them shimmered faintly, like heat waves reversed, not warmth rising, but warmth being pulled away. The fluorescent light steadied again, but the steadiness felt unnatural, forced, like a smile held too long. Dr. Clancy looked between Maeve and Aisling, her face pale. "What exactly is happening?" Maeve tried to speak, but her throat locked. Her mind pulled in 2 directions at once, toward the warmth beside her left shoulder and the cold that pressed gently against her right. Aisling answered instead. "They're not here to hurt her," the girl murmured, "but they won't wait forever." The HR woman stepped closer to the door, suddenly afraid to stay and afraid to leave. I don't understand. Should we call security? A doctor?" Aisling shook her head. "They won't see anything. They won't hear anything. This isn't for them." Maeve's breath trembled. She felt the warmth intensify near her left shoulder, soft, radiating, like standing near the morning sun behind a curtain. She felt something like a whisper brushing her thoughts. Choose rest, choose breath, choose light. Then the cold on her right surged, thin and sharp, like frost forming on glass. Ignore it. Keep going. Break yourself. Come closer. Maeve clutched her chest with one hand and Aisling's with the other. She felt split open, as though each heartbeat pulled her nearer to one side and farther from the other. Aisling stepped in front of her, forcing her mother to look directly into her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "you're walking toward one of them even when you don't mean to. Everyone does." Maeve felt tears rise. I don't I don't know what I'm choosing. Yes, you do, Aisling said, her voice steady. You've known for a long time, but you keep pretending you don't. The girl glanced toward the warm presence, and her eyes glimmered with something like longing, not for herself, but for her mother. Light doesn't shout, she said. It doesn't force. It just calls once and waits for you to hear it. And the other one? Maeve whispered, her voice shaking. Aisling's gaze shifted to the colder corner. A thin shudder ran through her small body. The other one shouts, and if you're too tired, too scared, too lost, you think shouting is guidance. Maeve's knees went weak. She sank into the chair she had avoided touching earlier. The room felt stretched again, the walls pulling slightly apart as if space itself were thinning. Dr. Clancy took a tentative step closer. Maeve, sweetheart, you're pale. Let me get you some... She froze. The light above her flickered, once, then steadied into a brightness so soft it looked like dawn trapped in a bulb. She stared up at it, her expression shifting from concern to awe, though she couldn't explain why. The HR woman gasped and stepped back, hand over her mouth. Did you feel that? The temperature? A breath of warmth drifted through the center of the room. Not wind, not electricity, presence. Something moved beside Maeve, not seen, not outlined, but real enough to make the smallest hairs along her arms rise with recognition. And then, a second shift, colder, heavier, stirring the papers on the table, pulling lightly at the edges. The two forces didn't collide, they didn't fight, they simply stood close, closer than before, as if the doors they represented were no longer faraway visions in Aisling's drawings, but real thresholds brushing against the edges of this world. Maeve pressed her palms to her face. I don't know what they want from me. Aisling knelt in front of her mother, taking both hands in her own. They don't want anything, she whispered. They're watching what you want. Maeve opened her eyes. They were wet, lost. I want you safe. I want to keep working. I want to... Her voice broke. I don't know. I don't know anymore. Aisling shook her head gently, almost sadly. You're answering with fear. That's not what they're listening for. The lights dimmed again, subtly, enough for shadows to stretch from the corners. The warmth pulsed. Rest, Maeve. Step back. Breathe. Live long enough to choose clearly. The cold pulsed. Push harder. Break. Collapse. Decisions made in exhaustion belong to us. Aisling's fingers tightened. Mom, one of them is patient. The other one is not. Maeve shivered violently. She felt as though she was standing inside her own judgment. Not final, not yet, but watching the path beneath her feet split into two invisible roads. I'm scared, she confessed. I know, Aisling whispered. That's why they sent the warning. Maeve stared at her daughter. Why you? Why show you all of this? The girl hesitated. For the first time since her visions began, uncertainty drifted across her face. Because children hear what adults forget to hear, she said, and because someone needed to speak before your name moved again. A beat of silence. Then Aisling pressed her forehead to her mother's. Mom, I saw what happens if you don't listen. Maeve's breath caught. What happens? Aisling didn't answer at first. She swallowed. Her small voice trembled. You start walking toward the dark door without knowing. You think it's just tiredness, just stress, just one more shift, but it's not. She looked up, tears finally welling. You disappear from yourself long before you disappear from the world. Maeve felt her heart collapse into itself. The cold presence behind her swelled slightly, as if acknowledging truth. The warm presence brightened, as though urging her closer. Doctor. Clancy finally whispered, voice shaking. Maeve, take the leave. Take it. Something isn't right. Maeve turned toward her supervisor, and for the first time truly saw the concern behind her eyes. Genuine. Human. The HR woman nodded. You're not losing your job. You're stepping back before you fall. Fall. A dangerous word. Aisling squeezed her hand again. Listen to the warm one, Mum. You still can. Maeve closed her eyes. The cold shifted, inching closer. Not violently, patiently. The warm presence waited, not demanding, not forcing, just there, ready. A soft, trembling breath escaped Maeve's lips. Then she whispered the words that tilted the scales. I need rest. The warm presence expanded gently, not triumphant, not victorious, simply relieved. The cold presence receded a fraction, pulling back into the darker corners of the room, though not gone, never gone. Aisling exhaled shakily. Her body relaxed. A tension that had lived in her shoulders for days slid away. They heard you, she whispered. Maeve looked at her daughter, tears falling freely now. Did I choose right? Aisling touched her mother's cheek tenderly. You chose light, Mom. The cold presence pulsed once, a final fading note of disappointment or warning, then dissolved into the edges of the room. Just as it vanished, a soft glow brushed Maeve's shoulder, warm as a hand placed gently in blessing. She shuddered, not in fear, but in something like release. Aisling smiled faintly. They're not finished, she said, but you changed their distance. Maeve held her daughter tightly, burying her face in her hair, breathing in the scent of rain and childhood and safety. For the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of a life not ruled by exhaustion. But something else lingered too, a truth not yet spoken, a warning not yet complete. Because as Aisling looked toward the window, her expression shifted, not fearful, not surprised, but knowing. They're waiting for your next choice, she murmured, and next time, the doors will be closer. On paper, it looked simple. Exhaustion, emotional distress, recommended rest period. In the system, it became a status code, a checkbox, a date set for re-evaluation. But outside the paper and screens, something far less visible shifted, a path slightly bent, a step back from a cliff she hadn't seen. The days that followed felt different, not lighter, not easier, just slower. Maeve woke without an alarm for the first time in months. The hospital corridors no longer echoed in her dreams. The constant beeping, the fluorescent lights, the rush of footsteps, all of it faded into a distant hum. In their place came other things, the sound of rain against the windows, the kettle boiling, Aisling humming absent-mindedly as she drew. Yet even in the quiet, Maeve could feel it. She was being watched, not by eyes, by consequence. One evening, as the sky over Dublin bruised into a deep blue, Maeve sat with Aisling at the small kitchen table. A candle burned between them, more for warmth of feeling than for light. The shadows on the walls danced gently with each flicker of the flame. On the table lay Aisling's drawings, stacks of them, doors drawn in different ways, light without shadows, shapes that looked like places but not on any map. Some pages were filled with small, tight lines, like sound trapped in graphite. Others were almost empty, with a single stroke that somehow felt heavy. Maeve turned one page after another. When did you draw all these? Some before, Aisling said. Some after. Before what? Before they let me see both places. Maeve's hand froze on a page. Tell me again, she whispered, from the beginning, not just pieces, all of it. Aisling looked at her mother, measuring her with a gaze too careful for a 7-year-old. You won't like it. I don't have to like it, Maeve replied softly. I just have to hear it. The girl nodded, as if that answer mattered to someone else too. She leaned back in her chair, feet not quite touching the floor. The candle flame bent slightly toward her, as if listening. The first time, Aisling began, I didn't walk, I just wasn't heavy anymore. I could see you and not see you at the same time. Maeve's throat tightened. I felt like music without a body, the girl continued. And then it happened very fast and very slow. There was the light. Not like this, she pointed at the candle. This one gets tired. That one doesn't. Her eyes unfocused slightly, seeing a place that wasn't there. It wasn't a tunnel, she said. People always talk about tunnels. It was more like a field, but not with grass, with time, like every moment you ever had stretched out all around you. You step on it, and it remembers where you were supposed to go. Maeve blinked, tears blurring her vision. "And heaven?" she whispered. Aisling smiled, a small, fragile smile, filled with a longing she couldn't name. Heaven feels like finally breathing after never knowing you were holding your breath. You don't see a person first. You see knowing. You see how much you're loved, all at once. And it hurts, but only because you didn't believe it before. Her voice grew softer. "There's no sun," she said, "but you don't miss it. Everything shines from inside things instead of on them. And you can hear, not with ears, with whatever you really are when you're not tired, not angry, not pretending." She fell quiet for a moment, fingers tracing the edge of the table. "But I didn't stay," she added. "They showed me the other place." Maeve's stomach knotted. "Hell." "They didn't call it that," Aisling repeated. "But you know." The candle flame snapped suddenly, small wax bubble bursting softly. "There's no sky," the girl said, her face tightening. "It feels like a room where someone forgot to put a ceiling, but also forgot how to look up. People there don't scream all the time. That's the part nobody understands. Sometimes they're just quiet, too quiet, like they've been emptied out." A coldness slipped into the room, subtle but undeniable. "And the fire," Maeve whispered. Aisling shook her head. "It's not the fire that hurts. It's what it burns away. Everything true you ever heard and didn't want to keep. Every chance you laughed at. Every time you said later to what was calling you now." She swallowed. "In that place, you remember every time you knew what was right and walked the other way, and you can't unknow it. That's the burning. It never finishes." A silence deepened between them. Maeve felt something press gently against her chest again, not as strong as in the hospital, but there. A reminder. "Why did they send you back?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "Why you, Aisling? Why, my child?" For the first time, the girl answered without pause. "Because they weren't done calling you," she said. "And they knew you'd listen if it came from a voice you carried inside your own body." Maeve closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek. "And the warning," she whispered. "The one you said you brought back. You told me heaven doesn't sleep, that it waits. What else did they tell you that you haven't said?" Aisling went still, too still. Her small shoulders tensed. She looked toward the corner of the room, the same corner she had looked at that very first night. The air there didn't move, but it felt like it did, shifting in a way only the heart could register. "They told me not to say everything," she admitted. "Some things people have to feel, not hear. If you hear them too soon, you think you have more time than you do." Maeve's heart pounded. "What can you say?" Aisling stared at the candle. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter than the flame. "They said, we don't fall into the dark place by accident. We walk there. One small step, one small decision. Every time we choose what breaks us instead of what heals us, the door moves closer." She looked at her mother. "You were almost there, Mom. You were breaking and calling it doing your best." The words hit harder than any diagnosis. Maeve covered her mouth. A sob rose from somewhere deep. not just from fear of death, but from the sudden, painful awareness of how many times she had chosen numbness over honesty, duty over health, busyness over presence with her own child. They said, Aisling continued, that hell is full of people who kept saying tomorrow to what heaven whispered now about. Maeve's breath shook. And heaven? She asked. Who ends up there? Aisling's expression softened. Heaven is where people go, who finally stop running from being loved, she said, even if it's at the very last moment. But it's harder to hear love when you're surrounded by noise you chose yourself. The candle flame steadied. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. Inside, the apartment felt like a small boat floating between two unseen shores. Maeve wiped her tears. Is that all? Is that the warning? Aisling hesitated. No. Her eyes grew wet now, too. They told me something else, she whispered. Something I didn't want to say. Maeve reached across the table and took both her hands. Tell me. Aisling looked straight at her. No softness now, no cushioning, just the clear, impossible weight of a 7-year-old who had seen too much. They said your name will be called again, she murmured. Not like at the hospital, not like in the hallway. For real. Maeve swallowed. When? Aisling shook her head. They didn't give a date. They don't count like we do. They just said, sooner than she thinks, later than she fears. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. And they said this, Aisling added, her voice dropping to almost nothing. When it happens, the door you've been walking toward will already be under your feet. Maeve stared at her daughter, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Can I change it? She asked, voice raw. Can I change which door I'm walking toward? Aisling's eyes filled with light again, the same quiet glow Maeve had seen that first night in the hallway. Yes, the girl said simply. That's why they sent me back at all. How? Maeve pressed. What do I do? Aisling looked down at their joined hands. You start listening when the light calls the small things, she said, not just the big ones, when it tells you to rest, to forgive, to apologize. To be kind when no one sees, to stop before you break. Those are the steps, little ones, but they all go somewhere. She paused, then added, You stop living like you have endless later. The candle cracked softly, a tiny piece of wax collapsing. They told me to say this to you, Mom, Aisling whispered, her voice trembling now with something like fear. They said, Tell her we don't visit forever. We warn, then we wait where she chooses. A deep, still silence settled into the room. It wasn't empty. It wasn't cold. It was full of possibility, of risk, of every unmade choice. Maeve pulled her daughter into her arms and held her there, pressing her against her chest as if she could keep heaven and hell both away by the strength of her embrace. But she knew the truth now. The doors were not out there. They were beneath every step, beneath every yes and every no. Later that night, after Aisling had fallen asleep, Maeve stood in the hallway where it had all started. The clock read 3:17 a.m. again. Rain streaked the window. The apartment was dark except for the faint light leaking in from the street lamp outside. She closed her eyes. If you're still listening, she whispered into the unseen. I heard the warning. A warmth brushed against her shoulder, not overwhelming, not dramatic, just there. She released a shaking breath. I don't know how to be holy, she admitted. I don't know how to be brave all the time, but I don't want to walk toward the dark door anymore, even by accident. The warmth pulsed softly, like an answer without words. In her room, Aisling turned in her sleep, a faint smile crossing her lips. Somewhere beyond the edges of what we call real, two presences stepped back, so not leaving, not abandoning, just giving space, watching, waiting, not in cruelty, in truth. Because when a 7-year-old girl is taken to heaven and hell and returns with a warning, it is not to satisfy curiosity. It is to ask a question no one else can answer for you. If your name was being called right now, softly, invisibly from both sides, which door have your steps really been walking toward? Would your heart recognize the light, or would you turn away?